Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Homemade Ketchup. That's right, this takes a long time to make. It's not that much cheaper, but at least when you're done, you will not like the flavor as much as the store-bought brand. Alright, so I want to be clear that I'm only doing this because we got so many food wishes for it, not because I think it's a good idea. You are completely crazy to make your own homemade ketchup. So on that note, let's get started. So we're going to need 2 cans of ground tomatoes, also known as crushed tomato. A lot of homemade ketchup recipes call for tomato paste, but I never like how those taste. So we're going to go old school and just start with crushed tomatoes and cook them down to sort of our own tomato paste. And by the way, we're going to use a slow cooker for this process. It's going to take a long time, but it's going to take some of the labor factor out of it. We're going to go ahead and rinse each of those cans out with about a 1/4 cup of water. So after the tomato product and a little bit of water, we need some sweetener. And in our case, we're going to use just plain white sugar. Of course, most of your store-bought brands are using corn syrup, or even worse, high fructose corn syrup. So I guess that would be one of the advantages of making it at home. So we're going to dump in our sugar. Of course, to balance the sugar, we're going to need some vinegar. And we're just going to use regular white distilled vinegar. So I'm going to pour that in. Obviously, all these measurements are critical, and they'll all be on Food Wishes, of course. All right, after that, we're going to go ahead and add some onion powder and some garlic powder. We're going to add some plain table salt, a little touch of celery salt, a little touch of dry mustard, a little bit of very finely ground black pepper, and 1 single clove. That's it, just one. In fact, I took that little berry off the top, that little bud. I want just a little bit of clove in there. All right, we're going to give that a stir. And as I was stirring, I was like, oh my God, you forgot cayenne. What are you doing? So a little bit of cayenne. And then basically the entire rest of the recipe is you putting your slow cooker on high and cooking it uncovered for a really long time until it reduces down by almost half and becomes very, very thick. Now you can definitely do this on the stovetop, but you'd have to stand there stirring like forever because it could burn to the bottom. And in a slow cooker, even though it's going to take like 10 or 12 hours, which is basically how long mine took, you still don't really have to worry about it scorching and burning as long as you're giving it a stir every hour or so. So to me, that's just easier and safer. Okay, so every once in a while, just give it a stir and monitor it. And like I said, it's going to take a really long time. And you'll actually notice in this shot here, the lights look totally different. That's because it's almost dark. And I had to turn my kitchen lights on. So at this point, I was pretty much done, but I ran out of daylight. And I didn't want to finish filming in the dark. So I decided to just put it away for the evening. I thought to myself, you can catch up in the morning. But anyway, the next morning, I brought it back up to temperature. And then to finish, we're simply going to put this through a fine strainer. But to make that a little easier, I like to give it a little blending with the stick blender, with the immersion blender. I guess you could do that with the raw tomato product, but I always feel like it works better at the end because it's thicker. So I'm going to give that a quick blending. At that point, we're going to ladle that into a fine strainer. And then simply use the back of a ladle to push the mixture against the screen. And it will trap any skins or seeds or whatever in the strainer. There you go. All right, so most of it will go through. The rest of that you're going to discard. Don't forget to scrape the bottom. There'll be lots of ketchup under there. At that point, I'm going to transfer it into a bowl that's easier to shoot. And then we're going to let it cool completely before the final step, which is tasting it. You want to taste this cold because that's how you're going to serve it. And as far as spices and salt go, things taste different hot and cold. So wait till it cools down. Give it a taste. I decided to go with a little more cayenne, a little more pepper, a little more salt. And of course, I'm using a clean spoon to stir that in. And if I want to taste it again, I'll drip from the clean spoon to the spoon I already tasted on. And that's how you prevent cross-contamination. Not that that's a big deal, but still. And once that's seasoned, you're ready to serve that up. May I suggest French fries? Those work nicely. So we give this a taste. Really good, although I feel like I'm forgetting something. There we go. Just need a little adult beverage. And all kidding aside, that really was delicious. Very, very, very similar to those popular supermarket brands. One of them rhymes with rhymes. Just a little bit of a brighter flavor, a little more tomatoey of a flavor, but very, very close, very similar. And was it worth it? Hell no. Like I said, you got to be crazy to make your own ketchup. So while I don't think anyone should ever try to make this, I did want to show you because so many people requested it. So to the craziest members of our audience who, despite my jokes, despite my warnings, will still attempt to make this, I'd like to say to those few brave souls, I love you guys. All right? So I really do secretly hope you give this a try, although on the record, don't do it. It's crazy. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the top secret recipe ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.
Dijon mustard. That's right, I'm going to show you how to make your very own Dijon mustard in the privacy of your own home. And other than the fact it takes about a week before you can taste the final product, this is very, very simple to make. And by the way, this is very fitting. This is the first video of the new year, since this was one of my resolutions, to finally make homemade Dijon, something that I'd always wanted to do but never tried before. Plus, I figured for a change of pace, why not make a resolution I'm actually going to keep? So let's go ahead and get started. And the first step is we need to make a flavorful liquid in which to soak our mustard seeds. So in a saucepan, we're going to dump 1 diced onion, along with some minced garlic, and then of course it would not be Dijon mustard without the wine. So I'm going to pour in some white wine. I'm using Sauvignon Blanc. I'm not really sure what that's called in France, but that's what I'm going to use. We're also going to want some white wine vinegar and a big splash of water. And what we're going to want to do here is cook this for about 15 minutes. So we'll set that on high heat. We'll wait for it to come up to a boil. We'll reduce our heat to medium-low, and we'll just let that simmer for 15 minutes, at which point we'll turn it off and let it cool to room temp. And once that's happened, we're going to go ahead and strain out the onions and the garlic. And because a couple dozen people will ask, yes, you should save those onions and use them in a soup or an omelet or a stew or a chicken salad or something like that. But anyway, we're going to strain that. Make sure you press out as much liquid as you can with the back of a spoon or a spatula. And what we're left with, they call the Dijon jus. Well, actually, nobody calls it that. But I do, mostly because I like saying jus, which means juice. And once that is strained and ready to go, we are ready to introduce our mustard. And we're going to use 2 kinds. I'm going to use some yellow mustard seeds and some ground mustard powder. And could you do this with just one or the other? I have absolutely no idea. I've never made this before. So we're going to go ahead and add those to our strained liquid. We're also going to season that up with a little bit of salt and a little bit of garlic powder. And by the way, that is definitely not garlic salt. That is just pure granulated garlic. And what we'll do is we'll give that a mix. And by the way, those little dark things you see floating around, I believe are brown mustard seeds. Man, I really hope that's what they are. But anyway, we're going to give that a thorough mix. And then what we'll do is we'll wrap this up and let it sit like that for 1 to 2 days. So put it in a place where you're pretty much guaranteed not to knock it over. And what's going to happen is those mustard seeds are going to swell up. They're going to soak up that liquid. And you're going to have something that's much, much thicker. Check it out. In fact, it kind of looks like a grain mustard right now. And if I'm not mistaken, you could cook it like this to make a grain mustard, but I'm not. I'm doing something smoother. So for the next step, we're going to puree this either with a regular blender or this immersion blender that I'm going to use. And of course, how smooth you process this is totally up to you. You are the Captain Ron of your Dijon. So if you only want to blend this a little bit and leave lots of seeds, go ahead. And on the other hand, of course, you could blend this completely smooth, which is kind of the direction I'm going. Although I do want to leave a little bit of texture to it. And no matter what method you're using to blend this, if you need to add a little water, like I did here, to make the blending easier, go ahead. We're going to add some water to this anyway when we cook it. But anyway, like I said, you're going to blend that till it's as smooth as you want. And right here, mine was perfect, except I kept going because it was making really, really cool shapes. But eventually the novelty of that wore off and I stopped blending. And once we get to our desired level of smoothness, we're going to transfer that into a saucepan along with a big splash of water. And we'll mix that in. And the reason we want some water here is because we're going to have to cook this for about 10 minutes. And that's going to be a little tricky if this is too thick. So I want you to stir in enough cold, fresh water until yours has the consistency something very similar to this. So what we'll do is we'll place that on medium-high heat, and we will bring it up to a simmer stirring. I like to use a spatula because you're able to scrape along the bottom. Okay, when you're cooking a mixture this thick and heavy, you can get scorching on the bottom of the pan. And once it starts to bubble, back the heat down to medium and cook it for 10 minutes. And you want to be careful. A mixture this thick really likes to bubble up from the bottom and kind of erupt through the surface. So please be careful not to get hit with any flying molten mustard. And like I said, we're going to cook that on medium for 10 minutes, at which point we'll turn it off. I'll give it one more vigorous stir with the whisk. And that Dijon mustard is pretty much done. And by done, I mean ready to jar. Certainly not ready to eat. In fact, I really don't even want you to taste it yet, because it's not going to taste that good. Okay, freshly made mustard has a very raw, very pungent, and not incredibly pleasant taste. Now, having said that, of course you're going to want to taste this, and of course you are going to taste this. Just don't expect it to taste good, that's all. And at that point, while this is still piping hot, I'm going to transfer that into 4 sterilized half-pint jars. And we want to fill these about a ½ inch from the top. And generally when you're doing things like this, you don't really want air bubbles. So you see how I'm kind of moving the spoon, kind of wiggling it around, which should prevent air from being trapped. Of course, once these are filled, you can always give it the old tappa-tappa. And if all else fails, you can always use a bamboo skewer for your smaller, more stubborn bubbles. And once your mustard has been jarred and debubbled, we'll go ahead and put on the lid, we'll screw down the ring,
And when you first do this, if you push your fingertip on the top of the jar, you're going to feel like a bubble. You see that? But as that hot mixture cools and condenses, it's going to create a vacuum in that jar, which is going to pull down that top lid, forming a very, very strong seal. And then once you've done that to all 4 jars, it's time to wait some more. As I mentioned, freshly made mustard does not taste good. So I'm going to recommend you let those cool, you pop them in the fridge, and you let those sit at least a week before opening it. Now, it could be ready in less time, but I'm going to leave mine for a week before the official tasting, at which point, finally, your homemade Dijon is ready to enjoy. And considering this is the first time I've ever made it, I was very, very happy. It tastes remarkably like Dijon mustard. So I really was happy with how this came out. But just to be sure, I double-checked with a hot dog, so I slathered some over a nice hot wiener. You know, this is one of the parts of the job I really relish. And it was, predictably, even better than on the spoon. Now, whether you should try this and whether you would like this, I don't know. I could totally see someone who uses regular plain yellow mustard not enjoying this. You may not be able to handle the realness. But you know what? There's only one way to find out. So I really hope you give this a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. All-American barbecue sauce. That's right, I am very excited to be showing you my take on America's most popular style of barbecue sauce, which of course originated in and around Kansas City. And I really do believe that if the average person knew just how easy and simple and incredibly fast this was to make at home, they would still buy it at the store. But thank goodness you're not average, because after you make a batch of this and taste just how incredible it is, I don't think you will ever buy that stuff from the store again. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with some ketchup, which is the base ingredient for this style of sauce, which is why if you can, try to use a good one. And I generally go for the non-corn syrup version of America's most popular brand. And then to our ketchup base, we have to add our sweeteners. And I like to use 2. Some brown sugar, and then the thing that makes brown sugar brown, which would be some dark molasses, which is never not beautiful. And then to balance all that sweetness, we need some tanginess, which is why we will pour in a whole bunch of white distilled vinegar, which is nice and high in acidity, but neutral in flavor. And then once that's in there, we'll go ahead and add our powdered peppers, which will include some smoked paprika, or regular paprika, some chili powder, and of course some cayenne. And how much depends on how spicy you want this. And then finally some freshly ground black pepper. And then we will finish this up with the spices, which for me are going to be some allspice, which tastes like all spices, plus a little bit of coriander, which by the way is the spice that makes pastrami taste so good. And then lastly, we will finish with a little bit of cumin. And that is going to be it for me. And then we'll simply take a whisk and give this a very thorough mixing. So yes, compared to a lot of barbecue sauces, a relatively short ingredient list. Okay, one of the big reasons people prefer the stuff from the store to somebody's homemade sauce is that the home versions tend to overdo it with the spicing. And I don't mean spiciness. I mean the spices like mace and cinnamon and a bunch of other stuff people put in. Whereas your average store-bought sauce tends to be much more subtly spiced and well-balanced. But having said that, you go ahead and add in whatever spices you want. I mean, you guys are after all the bosses of your barbecue sauces. So taste and tweak as you see fit. And that's it. Once this is mixed up, it's done. And does not need to be cooked. I mean, you can if you want. But generally, this is going to get heated through when you serve it. For example, when you brush them on those ribs to glaze them when you're grilling. So I don't cook this sauce. But what I do like to do, time permitting, is wrap it up and let it sit in the fridge for a day or two to give all those flavors time to develop. At which point it's ready to use for things like pulled pork sliders, which is a great delivery system to judge any barbecue sauce. Okay, a smoked and pulled pork shoulder has a relatively neutral flavor, which allows you to really taste what's going on with your sauce. And what's going on with this one, I think, is a perfect balance between sweet and tangy, which of course you can also adjust to your taste by altering the amounts of the sweetener and vinegar. But if you do enjoy those very popular Kansas City style sauces from the store, I really think you're going to love this. And of course, if you want to taste that on something a little less neutral, I find it absolutely fantastic on some highly seasoned ribs, like these amazing salt and pepper ribs, which I am going to show you how to make in an upcoming video very soon, since those really were absolutely stunning. And of course, you don't want to just keep your fancy homemade barbecue sauce in a bowl, which is why you can always funnel it into a squeeze bottle, and then keep that in the fridge until you're ready to use it. Although in the barbecue joints, they don't refrigerate the sauce. And you probably don't need to, since it has such a high sugar and acid content. But anyway, that's where I keep mine. Until I need to pull it out and squeeze it over some salt and pepper ribs. Did I mention those are coming up? So please stay tuned for those. But in the meantime, I really do hope you give this all-American barbecue sauce a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Sriracha! That's right, we are making our own homemade Sriracha hot sauce, also known as rooster sauce, also known as hot, another word for rooster sauce. And not only is making your own hot sauce at home possible, it's like really fun. So let me show you how to do this. And of course, it's going to start with hot red peppers. I'm using two varieties, a red jalapeno, also known as a Fresno chili, and I'm also going to use some red serrano chilies, which are much hotter. You're going to want to make sure those are rinsed and drained very thoroughly. And then as far as prep go, all we're going to do is cut off the stem end, and then we're just going to cut each pepper in 4 or 5 pieces. This is all going to get blended, so the size and shape really doesn't matter. Same thing to the serranos. And some people do remove the seeds before they chop these up, all right, because those membranes around the seeds are where most of the heat resides. So some people do remove that, although I've always considered those people kind of unclear on the concept of a hot sauce. So we're going to use these as is. All right, so once our peppers are prepped, we're going to go ahead and dump those into a blender, at which point we're going to add the rest of the ingredients, which include some garlic. We're also going to put in some brown sugar. Some people use honey. I use brown sugar. Some salt, and a little splash of water just to help this blend up. And then we're going to go ahead and puree that until it's very smooth. And you know the drill. Pulse on and off to start. And then once it gets going, go ahead and turn it on high speed until you have that beautifully pureed. All right, so that looks perfect. At that point, we're going to transfer this into some kind of glass jar or container or other non-reactive material. So I'm going to use this old milk pitcher. And because the next step is actually going to be the fermentation, we're going to call this a pepper mash. Okay, so we're going to transfer our pepper mash into an appropriate container. We're going to put some plastic wrap over it. Doesn't have to be airtight. We just want to keep the critters out. And then we're going to place that in a cool, dark location for 3 days, probably. Could possibly take a day or two longer, but we'll get into that. But like I said, we're going to let that ferment for 3 days, and at least once a day. You can do it twice if you want, but at least once a day you're going to take it out, and you're going to give it a stir. And do not be surprised if during these daily stirrings you notice some tiny bubbles. That would be the telltale signs of fermentation. All right, so you can see all those little bubbles starting. I believe this was after like a day and a half for me. And one quick tip, after you're done stirring, I like to scrape down the sides. And I really don't think that's that big of a deal, but it looks neater. And after the daily stirring and after you've cleaned the sides, go ahead and rewrap it, put it back in that cool, dark place. May I suggest your garage or a basement? This definitely does have a distinct aroma, as if things were fermenting, which they are. So if you have a spot outside the house, not a bad idea. All right? And then after 3 days, this is what mine looked like. And again, after 3 days, if yours doesn't seem like it's fermenting and doesn't have all the bubbles mine does, let it go another day. It's fine. And by the way, this is all perfectly safe. Any dangerous pathogens are destroyed by the beneficial bacteria that's growing during the fermentation, which is pretty cool. I mean, they're just microorganisms. They don't have to do that, but they do. And at this point, we are ready to finish our Sriracha. So we're going to go ahead and transfer that into a blender. We're going to add some white distilled vinegar, and then we're going to blend that smooth again. And please be careful if you're using a smaller blender. This is not exactly the kind of stuff you want flying out into your face. And once we've processed our fermented pepper and vinegar into a very, very, very smooth puree, we're going to go ahead and dump that through a fine strainer into a saucepan. And we're going to take a spatula and we're going to push everything, or at least as much as we can get, through that strainer. So that's going to take a few minutes, but most of it will go through. And all you really should be left with are all those seed remnants and bits of skin. All right, so once you're sure there's no more liquid coming out through the strainer, we'll go ahead and discard that, and we'll transfer our saucepan to the stove. We'll place that over medium-high heat, and we'll bring it up to a boil. And basically, we're going to boil that for about 5 to 10 minutes until it's the thickness that we want. And please be careful because there is sugar in this. You don't want to scorch the bottom. So keep a close eye on it, give it a stir often. And because I am genetically disposed to skimming foam, I can't resist. So I usually skim a little bit of the foam off. Although I have a feeling I'm just wasting hot sauce. Okay, so if you're some kind of hot sauce making guru, let me know. Am I wasting my time skimming? I have a feeling I am. But regardless, in the spirit of full disclosure, I did skim. And then like I said, you're going to boil that until it reduces slightly and gets the consistency you're looking for, which I think should be right about there. So while that might look a little bit on the thin side, when this cools, it's going to be perfect, as you'll see. So at that point, we're going to turn off the heat, let that cool completely before we try to bottle it. But once it is cooled, go ahead and use a funnel and transfer that into any kind of serving vessel you want. All right, squeeze bottle works great. One of these glass bottles is perfect. Unfortunately, I lost the cork top that came with this, but luckily I had this wine stopper that I could use. So I put that on there. And it's funny, that dude looks kind of familiar, but I just can't place it. God, that's going to drive me crazy. Actually, you know what? That's kind of giving me the creeps. Let me switch to a plain cork. That's much better. Anyway, there you go. Homemade Sriracha sauce. And sure, it took 3 days, but so what? There's like hardly any work involved. Come on. And then what is it good served on? Literally everything, including, of course, a couple simple fried eggs. And as I spoon that on there, you can really see it pretty much has the exact color and texture of the store-bought Rooster sauce. Really, I think the taste is almost identical. In fact, a fun experiment would be to serve this to your friend that doesn't know it's homemade to see if they noticed a difference. And I'm betting they won't. So this time of year, you should see lots of hot red pepper at the farmer's market or just a regular grocery store. So why not buy some and give this beautiful sauce a try, all right? So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.
Honey mustard sauce and or dip. Behind every great chicken finger is a great dipping sauce. And my personal favorite, honey mustard. By the way, I am doing or have done a chicken finger video that you'll see soon. So this goes with that, but this is a really simple and really delicious combination. So it starts with mayo, 1/3 of a cup of mayo. And then there's an argument. Yellow mustard or Dijon for honey mustard sauces? Why can't we have both? So I put both. I put yellow mustard and Dijon mustard. Of course some hot sauce, because I like it. And then honey. As you well know, all the ingredient amounts will be on Food Wishes. All right, we're going to mix that up. And, oh my God, I almost forgot the most important ingredient to balance everything out, about a tablespoon or so of rice vinegar. By the way, every single ingredient in this sauce is to taste. So you are going to adjust for your own personal taste. This is my favorite formula, and that is so delicious on crunchy, panko-coated chicken fingers that you're going to see, like I said, in a demo very shortly. And you're going to be glad you had the sauce recipe to dip them into. Anyway, I hope you give that a try. Check out the site for the ingredients. And as always, enjoy.
Ranch dressing. That's right, it's one of America's most popular dips and dressings, and yet virtually nothing is known about how it's made. I mean, a Google search only returns like 3,300,000 recipes for it. So I thought it was high time someone came forward and showed America how to make this incredibly delicious dressing. So I'm going to show you my personal secret formula, and it starts with mayonnaise. So we're going to throw some mayo in a mixing bowl. You're going to want to use the real stuff for this. And by the way, check it out. I just dumped it in and it made this perfect swirl pattern. There's no way that was staged. And then to the mayonnaise, we're going to add some sour cream or creme fraiche. I'm using creme fraiche. You know I like that nutty tanginess, but sour cream will totally work. And also a nice splash of buttermilk. So for me, it's this combination of buttermilk and sour cream that I really think makes this version special. Okay? So I'm going to give that a mix. That's going to be the base of our dressing, to which we're going to add the rest of the highly secret ingredients. And we're going to start with some onion and garlic, but not fresh. We're going to use garlic powder and onion powder, which is just pure dehydrated onion and garlic. And this is one of those instances where the dry powder actually is going to work better than the fresh stuff. It's going to be much more stable in this. The flavor is going to stay consistent. As raw garlic and onions sit in a dressing, they can change over time. So the powder is a good way to go here. By the way, that's not garlic salt and onion salt. So make sure the ingredients just say dehydrated garlic and onion. And then we're going to spice it up a little bit. I got some cayenne pepper. You're going to need some of that. We're also going to put in some freshly ground black pepper, which I guess I could have ground ahead of time and just dumped in. Because let's admit it, watching pepper being ground is not that exciting. Or is it? No, actually it's not. We're also going to throw in a pinch of salt. And then it's time for the herb content. We're going to put in some dry dill. Be careful of dill twigs. I'm going to pull that out. And I'm also going to put in some dry tarragon. So for the dry herbs, we have dill and tarragon. I'm going to give that a mix with a whisk. Not because I have to, but because I need time to talk. So we're going to mix that in, and then we're going to add a little bit of fresh herb with some finely sliced chives and some equally finely chopped Italian parsley. And of course, you're going to want to get all those exact measurements on the blog. And once that's mixed in, we're pretty much there, except for the last and very crucial secret ingredient, exactly 2 drops of Worcestershire sauce. Did I say that right? And why 2? Because 1 drop you would not be able to taste, and 3 drops you would. All right, so that's not a joke. You might want to think about that for a minute. And once all that's mixed together thoroughly, we're gonna not eat it. That's right, you have to cover it. You have to refrigerate it for a minimum of 4 hours. You have to give those dry ingredients a chance to hydrate. You want all those flavors to mingle. So really serving this right away is not a good idea. 4 hours is the minimum. Overnight, way better. All right, so I let mine stay overnight, and at that point, we're gonna unwrap and taste it. All right, so don't adjust your seasonings till the next day. Taste, a little more salt, pepper, whatever. Go ahead and adjust. And then transfer that into some kind of salad dressing delivery system. I'm using one of those little pourers. By the way, check out my pathetic, cheap plastic ladle. That's so embarrassing. I really need to start charging for these videos so I can afford some nice utensils. Anyway, enough complaining. We're going to go ahead and ladle that over the salad. And that is one incredible tasting ranch dressing. And the reason it's called ranch dressing is because on the ranches, the cowboys and the ranch hands get so attached to the animals that most of them are vegetarians. So they eat a lot of salads. So long story short, ranch dressing. Anyway, let me taste some of this. That is just so significantly better than anything out of a bottle, whether it's hidden or in plain sight. So if you've never had homemade ranch dressing, I hope you give this a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.
Here we go with our homemade mayonnaise. So easy. All right, the ingredients are on the recipe page, but I got 2 egg yolks. All right, so I'm going to dump it right in this little beaker here that came with my stick blender. To the egg yolks, I'm going to add the juice of half a lemon. Now, I know people, they freak out when I don't measure things. So I'm going to tell you, put in 1 tablespoon of fresh lemon juice. See, half a lemon is going to make a little more than that. All right, I got some white wine vinegar, very nice French imported nice vinegar. Okay, so I'm going to go with a tablespoon of vinegar. Now, this is a little more vinegar traditionally than put in mayonnaise. So I like it a little tangy. If you want to cut that back a little bit, go ahead. I got 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, very important. All right, 1/8 of a teaspoon of sugar. All right, maybe you wouldn't think that's in there, but 1/8 of a teaspoon, just a pinch. That's a teaspoon of Dijon mustard. All right, so that was our egg yolk and acid. We're going to top that with a cup of vegetable oil. I'm using canola, or canola, as they say in some places of the United States. And I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of olive oil. Now, any combination will work. You want to go the other way around, a cup of olive oil, 1/2 cup of vegetable oil, or all one or the other, up to you. But I think this is a nice combination. Now let it settle for a second, because we're going to stick this immersion blender in here, and the egg yolk needs to be at the bottom, so it only takes a second to settle. All right, so here we go. You're going to put in your blender, and you're going to hold it against the bottom. All right, there's our stick blender. I got a couple links on the recipe page for this. And you're just going to, they all have a trigger which lets you pulse it on and off. And you're going to start real slow. You're just going to give it a couple second pulses. All right, you'll watch. This is such an amazing kind of molecular happening here. It's really interesting. It's kind of culinary alchemy, how that oil just turns into this thick white spread. It's pretty cool. So I'm pulsing on and off real slow until I see it basically start to form. It gets really thick, very, very thick and white at the bottom. All right, now once you see it start coming together, you can get a little bolder. You can start moving that blender around a little bit, and it will incorporate all the oil. And in just a couple seconds, you are going to have the most delicious, creamiest, richest mayonnaise you've ever tasted for a fraction of the price. And you know those lists where people have, you have to do these things before you die? Eating fresh, homemade mayonnaise on a piece of bread, that's on my list. All right, you have to try that. There's nothing like it. In fact, see that? Look at that. I'm gonna take a bite out of this just to torment you. Oh man, that's the stuff. All right, so there you go. So help us bring down the mayonnaise monopoly. The mayonnaise industry, as we know it, should crumble after this video. So anyway, go ahead and try that. So easy. Little note here: if you're using a regular blender, do everything I did except just drizzle in the oil into the blender. You can't really start it all together. It won't work. But anyway, get one of those stick blenders. Enjoy.
Real aioli. That's right, there's a very good chance you've never had a real aioli. But don't feel bad. Probably 99% of the public hasn't either. And that's because what you've been eating is actually a garlic mayonnaise. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Those are delicious too. But if mayonnaise or even an egg was used as the base, it isn't a real aioli, which is simply an emulsification of garlic and oil. And to say there's a difference in taste is like the understatement of the century. So let's go ahead and get started. And to make a real aioli, we only need 4 ingredients. Some fresh garlic, of course, some olive oil, some salt, and a little bit of lemon. And believe it or not, that is it. Although what I'm about to show you next, some people consider the 5th and most important ingredient, our mortar and pestle. Is this ancient tool really is the key here? And I have 2 different kinds, one made from olive wood and one made from marble. And they both really work exactly the same, so it's just a personal preference. And for today's performance, I will be using the wood one. And our first step here is going to be to crush our garlic with a little bit of salt in that mortar. And to make that go a little quicker, and so our cloves don't fly out of there as we start, we're going to take a knife and give those already peeled cloves a little slicing. All right, don't worry about size and shape. This is all going to get smashed. But I do find it very helpful if we break this down a little bit before it goes in there. And by the way, I should have showed peeling this garlic because I never ever want you to buy pre-peeled garlic in the store. Do not be seduced by its convenience. So peel your garlic fresh. And then what we'll do once our garlic is sliced is go ahead and transfer that into the mortar, and we'll add about a half a teaspoon of kosher salt, or some other coarse grain salt. And we basically want to mash this down to a fine paste. And besides seasoning our aioli, that coarse salt is also helping the grinding process. So we will continue to work that over, crushing and smashing, mushing and mashing, until, like I say, we have a fairly smooth paste. Okay, you can see there's going to be a little bit of texture still left to it. But if you don't grind it at least as fine, emulsifying the oil is a little harder. So that's looking good right there. And what we'll do at this point is introduce about a teaspoon or so of freshly squeezed lemon juice. Okay, no pits, please. Those aren't good eats. So be careful. So I'm going to squeeze in about a teaspoon, and then we'll give that a quick mix until it's combined. And by the way, for whatever reason you don't have access to fresh lemon juice, you can definitely substitute with the vinegar of your choice. It's going to serve the same purpose. So we'll go ahead and stir in our freshly squeezed lemon juice. And once that's been accomplished, we have taken care of 3 of our 4 ingredients, which brings us to the olive oil. And one big tip here as we start this last step, we want to introduce this very slowly. So we'll just start by spooning in about a teaspoon or so, and we won't add any more until that's mixed in, which is just going to take a few seconds, but don't be in a big hurry. We will stir and smash that oil into our garlic mixture until we have something that sort of looks like this, at which point we can go ahead and add another spoon, and basically repeat that process until the oil's gone. So just like if we were making a salad dressing or a hollandaise or a mayonnaise, we want to go slow at the beginning until our emulsification forms, and then maybe we'll get a little more aggressive. And as far as the appearance goes, don't worry too much about how it looks at the beginning. It's going to resemble sort of an applesauce when you start. But as more and more of that olive oil gets emulsified, it's going to really thicken up until eventually we achieve something that looks pretty close to a mayonnaise. And classically, this entire process is done right in the mortar. But if you are feeling a little claustrophobic and you want to transfer this into a mixing bowl and do this step with a whisk, that will also work. It might even be a little easier. But I think the advantage of doing everything in the mortar is that while we're working that oil in, we're also continuing to crush the garlic. And it's the pulverization and crushing of those cells in the garlic which gives us that signature taste you really can't recreate using any other method. Not to mention, who needs to clean another bowl? So we'll continue stirring and smashing that olive oil into our garlic mixture. And as you can probably see, it's definitely getting thicker. And if at any point it looks like it's getting a little too thick, and you want to just smooth it out a little, just drip in a little bit of water. Or lemon juice. Either one will work, but be careful with the lemon juice, because we're not making a lemon sauce here. So for me, the water's a little safer. But anyway, to recap, we'll continue on adding the olive oil and observing. And as I mentioned, once that emulsification forms, you can add it a little quicker. This really is surprisingly stable and fairly hard to break. And by break, I mean the oil will separate from the garlic mixture. But anyway, we're going to continue on. And once all our olive oil has been introduced, If everything's gone according to plan, you should be looking at something very similar to this. Now, one optional step if you're crazy. If you wanted this super smooth, you could go ahead and pass this through a fine mesh strainer. But I've never done that. I kind of enjoy seeing all those little particles of crushed garlic. But suit yourself. You are the boss of the world's most famous primitive sauce. But I've never strained mine, and I probably never will. But what I will do is transfer this in some kind of clear glass dish, so I can take a few pictures. And that's it, our real, pure, true aioli is done. And if you've never had this before, and you've only had the garlic mayonnaise they call aioli, you are in for a pretty big shock. A good analogy would be if you only drink watered-down American beer, and then someone hands you like a world-class Belgian ale, and you're like, oh my God, I'm not sure if I like this. This has, flavor. So it is kind of staggering, but wonderfully so. And please don't judge it just on your finger. It's meant to be eaten on things. So if you're going to adjust your salt or acid, go ahead and taste it on a piece of bread, or maybe a lettuce leaf will work. And then once you're happy with it, and you've convinced yourself you could handle the immense pleasure it's going to provide you, it's ready to enjoy on so many different things. And let me quickly show you two of my favorites. Let's say you did a nice pan-fried steak, and you deglaze that pan and pour it over the juices. Man, that would be good just like that. But when you top it with a spoon of that real aioli, and maybe a little bit of fresh herb, you're talking about elevating that steak to otherworldly levels. I mean, just unbelievable. So using this to finish any and all meat dishes is highly recommended. Or instead, if you're one of these vegetarians I've heard about, it does not get much better than a steamed or roasted artichoke, topped with copious amounts of real aioli. That is a classic for a reason. I could eat 2 of those. And I actually did as soon as I turned off the camera. But anyway, that's it. How to make real aioli. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with garlic mayonnaise, except that it's not this. And will you actually like this better than that? I have no idea. But there's only one way to find out. So I really do hope you give this a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Fire roasted cherry tomato salsa. That's right, show me someone that plants cherry tomatoes, and I'll show you somebody that has too many cherry tomatoes to eat. And if you're one of those people, there's no better way to use up all those extras than by making this delicious and dangerous looking salsa. And for whatever reason, if you didn't plant cherry tomatoes, don't worry. They're super easy to find at the market, especially this time of year when they're extra, extra sweet. So to get started, we're going to take a foil-lined baking sheet and drizzle on a little bit of olive oil and brush that all over. And once that's done, we're going to go ahead and dump on our cherry tomatoes. Those, of course, have been rinsed and drained, and the little green things taken off the top. I'm actually using a variety called Sweet 100s, which if you can find are really, really good for this. And then to that, we're going to add 1 onion that I've just roughly chopped, and we'll place those pieces in and about the tomatoes. Now, since this is all going to get blended later, please don't worry too much about precision cutting. And then besides the tomatoes and the onions, we're also going to do some garlic cloves, but leave the skin on. Leave the paper on the clove. Okay, we'll peel that off after this is fire roasted. And then last but not least, I'm also going to do some sliced jalapeno, which I've partially seeded. So I cut them into thick rings. Whatever seeds fell out, I left out. Whatever seeds stuck in, I left in. And we'll scatter those in the mix. And that's pretty much it. And then what our game plan is here, we're going to put this under a hot broiler until these vegetables are well charred. And for the purposes of this recipe, we will refer to that as fire roasting. And you want to get these veggies pretty close to the heat. So what I like to do, and what you might have to do, is put a pan on the rack first. So when I slide my veggies in, they're nice and close to the heat source. So find something that gives you that perfect distance. But anyway, we're going to slide those vegetables in and broil those on high until very well charred. So let's go ahead and take a peek. This has been about 5 minutes. And you might be thinking, hey, those look perfect. They got a nice little char going. They look nicely roasted. No, these are not even close. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and turn the pan and put those back in. Because when I say charred, I mean charred. They need to look like this. All right, the tops of those tomatoes are going to get black. Same with the onions. The onions are going to kind of soften up. Those garlic cloves are going to have been roasted in the skin. And then all we need to do is let this sit for a few minutes until it's cool enough to handle. Because what we need to do before we blend this is pull off those garlic skins. Now, of course, I didn't take my own advice because I was in a hurry. And I peeled these while they were hot, thereby burning my fingertips. So do as I say, not as you just saw me do. But anyway, let those veggies cool a little bit, and then hopefully painlessly remove those garlic skins. And at that point, we're going to transfer everything into a blender. And of course, be sure after you transfer the vegetables to add any accumulated juices. Oh, that stuff's amazing. Do not throw that away. So we'll pour that in. And then before we blend this, let's add the rest of the ingredients. So first up, I'm going to squeeze in the juice of 1 lime. And I know because of my bad editing, it only looks like I'm putting half in. But I actually squeeze the whole thing in there. And then we will season this up with some salt, good amount, and some freshly ground black pepper. We'll also do a few shakes of cayenne. It doesn't need it, but we're going to put it anyway. And I apologize, in between each of these ingredients, I keep bumping the table. Hey, I got big hips, what can I say? I also want a very small pinch of dry oregano, just a little bit, and a little pinch of ground cumin, or cumin, depends on where you're from. And then last but not least, a nice handful of fresh cilantro leaves, and that is ready to blend. So we're going to head over to the blender. And by the way, blender makers, you're putting too many buttons on these things. We just got a new blender, which I'm still trying to figure out. I mean, come on, we're making salsa. I'm not trying to launch a nuclear sub. Why do I need all these buttons? But anyway, let's try number 4. And that seems to be working. Although with anything like this, generally it's a good idea to pulse it on and off. That tends to ensure even blending. Although one big tip, while the pulsing is a great technique for something like this, you really want to make sure your lid's on tight. But I did not have my lid on tight, which as you can see produced what we call wall salsa, which, you know what, wasn't that bad. Just kidding, I did not eat that, allegedly. But anyway, to finish this off, let's take a spatula and scrape it down. Give it one more quick blend. And that fire-roasted cherry tomato salsa is basically done. So let's go ahead and transfer that into a bowl, and you can see how gorgeous that looks. And by the way, it's going to get even more gorgeous because there's a lot of air bubbles in there now. So as this sets, it's going to get even darker and more sexy looking. Now, obviously at this point, you're going to want to taste. You can adjust the seasonings a little bit, especially salt. But you really do want to do the final adjustments once this is cold, which is the next step. We really want to wrap this up and put this in the fridge for a few hours to develop the flavors. Okay, yes, you can serve it right away, but much, much, much better if you let it sit for a few hours, okay? So I did let mine sit and mature. I pulled it out, I tasted it again, I adjusted for salt, as I mentioned earlier. And of course, we're going to transfer that into some kind of appropriate serving container, which as you can see, I surrounded with chips and garnished with a little sprig of oregano. We gave cilantro the day off. And finally, that fire-roasted tomato salsa is done. I just love how this looks. It just looks like it's going to taste awesome, which it does. Charring those vegetables really brings out a tremendous amount of flavor. And as good as this is on plain chips, wait until you see what we do with this next week. Oh yeah, major, major spoiler alert. Very, very soon, we're going to be using this fire-roasted salsa on our official Food Wishes version of carnitas. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, I really hope you give this amazing salsa a try. And yes, that is how you pronounce it, salsa. I mean, come on, who are you going to believe, me or your Spanish teacher? But anyway, no matter how you pronounce it, you definitely should make it. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Homemade creme fraiche. That's right, we're making our own cultured cream. When we did the butter making video, a lot of people chimed in with comments and emails saying, hey, you should try that with creme fraiche. It makes even a better butter. So I don't know if I'm going to turn this into butter, but I do love fresh sour cream, which is basically what creme fraiche is. And here is how you make it. So we're going to start with a sterilized jar. That means it was cleaned thoroughly and then dipped in boiling water for a few minutes. I'm going to pour in heavy whipping cream. To our cream, we're going to add 3 tablespoons of cultured buttermilk. It has to be real buttermilk with a live culture in it for this to work. Now, by the way, many of these creme fraiche recipes call for heating the cream first to sort of give it a head start, because the warmer this mixture is, the faster that culture grows. Kind of wanted to experiment with just using the cream as is. So if you're wondering why I didn't heat it, we're going to try it without. And you know what? I think it's going to work. Now I'm going to cover this. I want something that's going to keep any dirt, dust out of it, but I also want it to breathe. So I'm using a coffee filter with a rubber band attached to the top, and that's going to do nicely. We're going to leave that out in a warm spot. All right, 70-something degrees is supposed to be perfect. All those numbers are on the internet, and I'll have it in the blog post. But basically, the warmer it is, the faster this reaction. I'm sure there's a point where it becomes too warm. I kept mine in my oven, sort of near the oven light, because my kitchen is freezing all the time. I live in San Francisco. It's always chilly. And here we go. 24 hours later, I had some beautiful looking cultured cream. All right, see how that thickened up? So cool. Now, what we're going to do, all right, I'm going to clean off the top where I made a big mess. I'm going to put the lid on, and we're going to put that in the refrigerator for 24 hours. It's going to continue to thicken. It's going to get a little tangier. And hopefully, one day from now, we're going to have creme fraiche. So this is me a day later talking. Do I sound older? I feel a little older, like a day. All right, so the creme fraiche was in the fridge for 24 hours. I stuck the spoon in, and I was so happy. Because what came out of that jar was the most incredibly beautiful, thick, creamy, amazing creme fraiche. Think awesome sour cream times infinity. All right, look at that. That is just such a beautiful thing. And the taste, it's almost insulting to say it tastes like sour cream. It has such a deep flavor. Yes, it's tangy, but it's not like that one note flavor you get with sour cream. There's a little bit of a nuttiness to it. Also, not only does it taste and feel better than supermarket sour cream, you can cook with this light cream. It'll boil, it'll simmer, and it won't separate, curdle, and break like sour cream will. In fact, you're going to see this used in a beef stroganoff video. It's going to blow your mind. Anyway, I really hope you give this a try. This is one of those projects that should be on all foodie bucket lists. Because until I get a reliable source that says there's, creme fraiche in heaven, I don't want to take any chances. So go to the site. All the ingredients are there with specific amounts, as usual. And as always, enjoy.
Thai-style sweet chili sauce. That's right, as promised, I'm going to show you my take on what I consider one of the greatest dipping sauces of all time. And generally, this sauce is made in one of two ways. There's the thinner, quicker, uncooked version, and then there's a slightly more complex, cooked, thicker version. Well, this is actually a hybrid between the two, and I think the results are spectacular. I mean, this stuff just has everything you could possibly want. And I'm not just talking about it in a dipping sauce. I'm talking about it in life. So I'm very excited to show you this, and we will begin with the star of the show, our Thai chilies, also known as bird's eye chilies, which is kind of weird. I mean, if you're a bird and your eye looks like this, you better get that checked out. And as you can see, we have a few different colors here, but these are all the same pepper. The green ones simply haven't ripened to be red yet. So they all start out green and then kind of turn yellow and then orange and then eventually red, which these really haven't yet. Maybe it's too early in the season. And by the way, the redder they are, the hotter they are. So ideally these would be all red, but no worries, these are still going to work. So I picked out the ripest ones I could find. And to prep these, all we need to do is mince them up very finely. And we're not going to seed these. In fact, I'm not even sure if that's possible. And if it is, it's going to take you forever. So we don't worry about the seeds here. We just chop everything up nice and fine. And if you're smart, wear some gloves for this. I didn't, but you should. These things are hot, as in really hot. They're probably closest in heat to like a habanero. So please be careful, especially if you don't wear gloves. Do not be touching your you-know-what. So we will go ahead and finally chop up a couple tablespoons of chili peppers. And then as far as the rest of the fresh ingredients go, we're also going to want a whole bunch of finely crushed garlic, as well as some fresh lime juice. And then once those fresh ingredients are prepped, we can move on to the non-fresh, cooked portion of the program. So into a saucepan, we will dump a half cup of good old-fashioned fresh cold water. And then we will follow that up with some white distilled vinegar. And yes, technically you can use another kind of vinegar. I mean, you are the Fat Boy Slim of this Nam Jim. But the vinegar in this is for acidity, not for flavor, which is why something neutral works best. And then besides the vinegar, we also want a couple tablespoons of Asian fish sauce, which is absolutely mandatory here. In my opinion, you really can't make this sauce without it. I mean, you can replace the saltiness with other stuff, but it just will not have that same savory funk. And then we're definitely going to need something sweet to balance all the heat. So we will go ahead and add some brown sugar, which if you want this to be more authentic would be palm sugar. But the brown sugar does work very nicely. And then next up, I'm going to add a spoon of ketchup. That is for flavor, color, and so I get some emails from Thailand. So we'll add a little bit of that. And then to hedge our bets and give us a 1-2 punch of chili goodness, in addition to the fresh Thai chilies, I'm also going to add a couple spoons of preserved chilies in the very easy to obtain form of sambal. Which reminds me, this sauce can be made with any combination of fresh, dried, or preserved chilies. And I will go over a few of those options on the blog. And then last but not least, we're going to finish this off with 1 spoon of cornstarch. And then we'll take a whisk and mix that up. And by the way, we're saving a step here. Usually that cornstarch is mixed with water and stirred into the sauce at the end. But this is going to work just the same, and we're going to save a step. So we will stir that until that cornstarch disappears, at which point this is ready to cook.
So we'll head over to the stove and place this over medium-high heat. And all we need to do here is bring this up to a simmer, stirring occasionally. And because we're making kind of a small batch, this is going to happen pretty quick. So don't walk away. Keep an eye on it. And like I said, we're going to bring that up to a simmer stirring. And as it starts to bubble, you should notice it will thicken up, but just a little. Okay, I do not like this sauce too thick. So I tend not to add as much cornstarch as some of the recipes. But again, that's up to you. You could add more if you want. And then basically, as soon as our mixture starts to simmer and thickens up a little bit, we are done. We can go ahead and remove that from the heat. And then, while it's still piping hot, we will introduce our fresh ingredients. So we will toss in our garlic, as well as our minced Thai chilies, and then we'll take our whisk and give that a mix. And because this mixture is still nice and hot, that is going to take some of the sharpness away from the garlic, but it's not going to completely mellow it out, as it would have if we'd added that stuff before we simmered. So we will go ahead and stir in our chilies and garlic, and then once that's been incorporated, the last step, at least for now, is to add our fresh lime juice, and we'll stir that in, and that is pretty much it for our sauce. Except, of course, as always, we're going to have to taste and adjust for seasoning. But we can't do that yet. This sauce is way too hot to taste. And I don't mean physically. Because we're going to serve this room temp, that is the temperature we need to taste it at. So what we're going to do is let this cool down completely, and then we will check it out and make sure it's tasting just like we want. So this is my sauce a couple hours later, completely cooled. And right here you can get a good look at what I consider the perfect viscosity. You don't want it too thick or too thin. You basically want it perfect just like this. And now that it's cooled, we can take a taste and adjust if we need to. I didn't because I always use exactly the same amounts. And then once we're happy with how that tastes, we can start dipping things in that immediately or transfer it into some kind of appropriate container. I chose this glass jar because it's see-through, because I really want to show off what is one incredibly gorgeous sauce. In the taste, even on a plain spoon, just insanely delicious. And other than having to mince up some chilies and some garlic, very fast and easy to make. And then if we're not going to use all this up, we could just screw a lid on and pop it in the fridge, where it should last for at least a few weeks. Although I guarantee nothing. But anyway, I can't go out on a plain jar shot. So let me put some of these next to some fried spring rolls. No, those are not homemade. And then I'll finish up by garnishing with a few of those green chilies, which I added because I thought they'd look good in the pictures. But you know what? That is a stupid idea for a garnish, because those really are too hot to eat raw. And even though you tell your guests that, there's always that one friend in every group, usually it's that guy that cuts the sleeves off his shirts. He'll go ahead and try one because they're there, and it won't end well. So while those chilies are a bad idea, what is a great idea is to enjoy this sauce with some fried spring rolls. Man, that is good. And by the way, if you're asking, why would you make a beautiful homemade sauce like that and then serve it with frozen spring rolls? Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time for questions. But speaking of frozen spring rolls, look what they included in the box. Oh yeah, a plastic pouch of sweet chili sauce. So which one are you going to serve it with? This one that indicates you love your guests? Or this one that says, I'm not even sure I like you? I think we all know the answer to that. So I really do hope you give this amazing sauce a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Creamy blue cheese dressing. That's right, I'm going to show you my top secret method for making blue cheese dressing, not to be confused with a top secret recipe, because that's not what this is. My blue cheese dressing recipe is pretty straightforward, but it's the method to get the blue cheese into the dressing that's my highly guarded secret. But I've held out long enough, and I'm now prepared to show you. All right, so step one, we got to make the creamy dressing base. And we're going to use the holy trinity of all creamy dressing bases, which would be mayonnaise, regular full-fat mayonnaise, some sour cream, and or creme fraiche. And yes, you yogurt people, plain yogurt should work here. And then last but not least, buttermilk. And sometimes I'll adjust the amount of buttermilk depending on how thick I want this. All right, if I'm going to use it for a straight salad dressing, I like it a little thinner. If I'm doing it for a dip, I might do it a little thicker. But it's up to you. You have to take personal responsibility for your salad dressing's viscosity. And once our base is together, we can start flavoring this up. I'm going to go with a little bit of crushed garlic. And I'm saying crushed, but you know what? I actually did that on the microplane. I just grated a clove. Works pretty good. We're also going to add some freshly ground black pepper, some dry mustard, a nice healthy dose of cayenne. We're going to need some salt and a little bit of sugar. And of course, those little brown drips would indicate that we're also about to put in some W sauce, which is what I now call Worcestershire sauce, since I gave up trying to pronounce it. Okay, so a little capital W sauce, and we're going to take a whisk, and we're going to mix that very thoroughly. So give that a nice whisking. All right, this is what whisking looks like from the side view, and then whisking from the top view. Okay, so is everybody clear on the whisking? So once the base of your creamy blue cheese dressing is done, it's ready to introduce the most important ingredient, the blue cheese. And here's what I believe is the ultimate method for accomplishing that. We're going to use one of these. We've all heard that saying, grater's going to grate. So if you take a frozen piece of blue cheese, which is what I have right here, I put that in the freezer for at least an hour, the molecules will slow down significantly and it will harden up. And when you take that frozen piece of blue cheese and you rub it on that grater, what you get is little frozen chips of blue cheese. And I'm not sure why I'm doing this on the cutting board. Let's do it into the dressing. And if you grate that frozen blue cheese into your dressing, because you're getting such beautiful small shavings, it's going to incorporate perfectly as opposed to the chunks which just fall to the bottom. So what I like to do is grate a little bit, stir it in, then grate a little more and stir it in. I don't want it clumping all together. So give it a stir. Grate in some more, give it a stir, until the wedge is gone. So crumbling blue cheese in here totally will work. It's just a lot messier, and like I said, what you end up with is a creamy salad dressing with chunks of blue cheese in it versus a blue cheese dressing. I want my blue cheese dressing to taste basically like liquefied blue cheese. And with this grater method, those pieces of cheese are so nice and small and thin that they stay suspended in the dressing. So every single bite has just about the same amount of blue cheesy flavor. And it's not like you got to wait to bite into a blue cheese chunk to get that. And also because of all that extra surface area from the grating, we don't end up having to use as much. So it really works on many levels. And once your blue cheese has been grated in, I'm going to give that one last stirring with the whisk. And that is one gorgeous blue cheese dressing. And then once that's done, I like to wrap it in plastic and refrigerate it for at least 3 or 4 hours. You want to give those flavors time to meld. All right, overnight's even better. I guess technically this is optional, but I really do think it tastes better if you let it sit. So I actually let mine sit overnight, after which I served it up on a wedge salad. So I have a 1/4 head of iceberg lettuce, some red onions, some cherry tomatoes, and of course if you do like the big chunks, crumble some on. I'm actually going to use the same technique with the grater and just put a little more on top of mine like that. And that was absolutely delicious. And you gotta love the wedge salad because you need a fork and a knife to eat it. It's just like eating a steak, except it's lettuce and not nearly as satisfying. All right. But this amazing blue cheese dressing more than made up for that, I think. And really my only complaint with this salad, I didn't put nearly enough blue cheese dressing on. So let me fix that. And like I said, every bite is bursting with blue cheese flavor because we use the old grater's gonna grate method. So even if you already have your own favorite blue cheese dressing recipe, you can still use the grater technique to get the cheese in there. So I hope you give that a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Buffalo chicken wing sauce. I cannot believe I haven't shown you this yet. I know we've done wings before, but we've never done the original buffalo style. And like us folks from Western New York, it is a very simple thing. Okay, so the 2 main ingredients are butter, although according to my sources in Buffalo, the original recipe called for margarine. Don't use it. So we have butter, we have Frank's hot sauce. You can use Louisiana hot sauce, but Frank's hot sauce is the original. A few drips of Tabasco or other hot sauce, Worcestershire sauce, of course some cayenne pepper, garlic powder, a pinch of salt, and the secret ingredient, white distilled vinegar. Of course, all the ingredients will be on the site. You know they will. All right, we're going to put that over medium heat. And we're going to bring that up to a simmer, stirring with a whisk. And that butter is going to emulsify right into that hot sauce and into the acid from the vinegar. And as soon as you see a few bubbles starting to simmer on the sides, turn it off. Give it a whisk, set it aside, and reserve it. Now, you've seen me make chicken wings before, so I didn't show that. That'll be on the site. So I have my oven fried chicken wings. You can deep fry them if you want. All right, not really necessary. You're going to put them in a stainless steel bowl, pour over some of the sauce. Now this much sauce will make enough for 4 to 5 pounds of chicken wings. So I had like 2 3/4 pounds here. So I used about a half. Pour the sauce over, put a plate or pan on top, and give it a shake. That's how they do it in Buffalo. They don't stir, they shake. Once it's coated, you can serve as is, or if you want to dry them out a little bit, throw them back on the sheet pan, drain the oil off, put it back in the oven, which is still a little hot, and let them sit there for about 10 minutes, and the sauce kind of dries onto them a little bit. Either way, delicious. Frank's hot sauce is not very spicy, so if you want this to be extra spicy, make sure you kick it up with some hot sauce or some cayenne and so forth. Anyway, just a little quick and easy video on how to make buffalo-style chicken wing sauce. By the way, this is very close to the original recipe. I went to college with the cousin of a busboy that worked at the original Anchor Bar in Buffalo. Said this is what was in it, pretty much. So I hope you give this a try. All the ingredients are on the site, and as always, enjoy. How to make your own prepared hot horseradish. That's right, every time we do a video that uses horseradish, I always get a bunch of emails from people claiming that they can't find horseradish in the jar. Oh, they say they can find the fresh root, but nothing that's already made. So if you're one of these people that just does not have access to prepared horseradish, or you've just always wanted to know how to make it yourself, I figured I would show you how it's done. So let's go ahead and saddle up and start what is a very simple procedure. So first up, you're going to need some fresh horseradish root, which looks something like this. Well, actually, it looks exactly like that, since that's horseradish. And then before we're able to process this, what we need to do is peel it. So I'm going to take my heavy-duty potato peeler and peel these roots right down to the white flesh. So don't worry about peeling too much. We want to be very thorough. And like I said, we want to peel everything that's not white. And since I'm pretty sure you're all clear on the concept of peeling, let's go ahead and move on to what happens after they're peeled, which would be to take a knife and trim off the ends. And then we're going to cube this up. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this in half, and then we'll slice it lengthwise. And by the way, horseradish is very, very woody and firm. So please be very careful and keep your fingertips out of the way. And then what we'll do is turn it and just slice it into, 1/4-inch, half-inch pieces. And right here I started slicing and I realized I want these a little smaller. So I split them lengthwise again before continuing on with the aforementioned slicing. And even though we're actually going to grind this in a food processor, we really do want to cube them up like this first, as they will process way more easily. So we'll continue on, dividing and conquering and slicing. And then once we've prepared the horseradish for our prepared horseradish, the rest of this procedure is incredibly simple. What we'll do is process this horseradish with some nice plain fresh cold water, and then to finish it off, all we're going to have to do is add some salt and some white vinegar. And believe it or not, that is pretty much it. So at this point, we can head over to the food processor. And yes, you really do need one of these to make this, but if you don't have one, I will give you a couple tips on the blog that will still make this possible. So we will dump our horseradish in with a splash of cold water, and we will begin like we always begin with this stuff. We'll pulse on and off to get it started. And once it gets going, we'll give it about a half minute, at which point we'll stop and scrape it down, just in case any of the bigger chunks are not mixing in. And it's at this point I must issue a very serious warning. As soon as we take off this top to stir it up, you're going to get hit in the face with a huge invisible cloud of fiery horseradish gas. So do not, under any circumstances, stick your face in there, and make sure you're working in a very, very, very well ventilated room. Like I'm talking windows open and fans behind you blowing the fumes away. And I'm not exaggerating, this is like tear gas level eye pain. Or so I've been told by friends. So we will stir that with the spatula and continue grinding, and we do want to get this pretty fine. And during this process, if you think it needs another splash of water, you are going to go ahead and add one, which is what I'm doing right here. I thought it needed to be a little wetter, so we'll go ahead and we'll continue grinding, adding as much water as we think it needs, until we have a very, very fine mixture that looks something like this. And again, let me reiterate, the fumes coming from this thing are incredibly, searingly hot. In fact, if you own a gas mask, that would not be a bad idea here. Or maybe just some ski goggles. But anyway, that's up to you. You're the Mr. Ed of what to put on your head. And then at this point, what we'll do is wait exactly 2 minutes before adding the salt and the vinegar. And from what I've heard, if you wait a couple minutes before adding the vinegar, you'll actually increase the heat level of your prepared horseradish. And I'm not sure of the science behind it, or if that's just an old wives' tale, but I do it because I remember someone saying that a long time ago, which is why I do a lot of things. So I'm going to let my mixture sit there exactly 2 minutes, and once we've given it a heat-generating rest, we are now fine to dump in the salt and our white distilled vinegar. And once we've added those, we're going to continue to process this until we have a nice, very fine, kind of smooth, kind of creamy mixture. And just like when we processed our horseradish cubes to begin with, it's going to be up to us to add enough water to get the proper texture. Or as I should say, the texture you want. So I let that run for about a minute, and then I took the lid off, gave it the old check with the spatula. Again, doing my best to avoid those eye-searing gases, and decide to add another splash of water, and we'll continue to do that, processing, checking, adding water if necessary, until eventually we get something that looks like this. And it may sound obvious, but what we're going for is something that has the consistency of a nice prepared horseradish from the store. So let's go ahead and take a closer look as I transfer this into my airtight storage container. And it sure looks like prepared horseradish. And it definitely smells like prepared horseradish. But does it taste like a delicious extra hot prepared horseradish? Yes. Yes, it does. This just has such a vibrant, intense, aromatic horseradish flavor that really is superior to anything you're going to find at the market. And then once you have transferred that into some kind of airtight containers, we will seal that up and keep it refrigerated where it should last for, at least a month. And yes, you can also freeze this. But anyway, that's it. How to make your own hot prepared horseradish. If you'll excuse me, I'm going to go try to find a nice big piece of prime rib somewhere so I can double check that this stuff is as awesome as I think it is. So I really do hope you try to go out and find some fresh horseradish root, as well as access to a very well ventilated kitchen, and give this great condiment and pretty fun project a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.